Today, remember Tumblr? Well, it's back. The question is, why?
Then Peter Thiel is shifting his focus, and it may be time to be very, very afraid.
And lots of companies made big money during COVID. Zillow and Peloton, not so much.
I am Steven Rosenbaum, and this is Future Forward.
I'm Alexa Scordato. Let's launch.
Hey, Alexa.
Hey, Steve. Happy snowy Sunday.
So, listeners of this podcast will know that there are a lot of things Alexa and I agree on, and there's other things we don't agree on so much. And then there's places where she thinks I'm kind of crazy, and I feel the same way about her. And I'm going to reveal to all of you a disconnect between us that will surprise you or maybe not. Alexa is going to actually watch the Super Bowl, and I am going to watch the Puppy Bowl.
I watched the Super Bowl for two reasons. I actually do watch football. I think this was one of the best NFL postseasons in recent history. And as a marketer, this is like a big time for big brands. So I also watch it for the commercials.
So when you say it's a big season for football, is it because the uniforms are different, or because there's special music playing in the background?
No, all of the all of the playoff games this year came down to like the last 2 minutes. They were all very exciting games. So even if you didn't have a team that was in it, it was good quality football.
I'm going to just, we have so many things to talk about on this pod that we're just going to set that aside. And those of you who are watching us live can jump into the comments and put in your 2 cents. And then as we go into our various iTunes iterations, not so much. All right. So we've got 3 things we're going to talk about today. We're going to start with Tumblr, which is a story that you found that I did not know was happening. So it's great. And then we're going to talk about Peter Thiel a bit, which I've been researching my fingers to the bone, and every peel of the onion gets scarier and scarier. And then I want to call it Zillow, but you call it Zillow, and that's correct, Zillow.
Mm-hmm.
And Peloton, both of whom took big swings at COVID land and failed massively. And so we'll talk about that. But let's start. So what brought Tumblr to your attention? Like what made you say this is happening?
So there are 2 articles that were published recently, one in the Atlantic, one in the New Yorker. And I mean, it was just interesting to kind of see this kind of coverage for a site that has been around for a really long time and isn't necessarily part of our daily tech lexicon. Like when you hear big tech, you sort of hear Facebook and Netflix and Google and Apple, but you don't hear Tumblr. But once upon a time, Tumblr was such a staple in, I think, people's digital diets, myself included. Like I have the URL alexa.tumblr.com, and I created it probably the same day I created my Twitter account. So just putting that in context. So it's fascinating because
Tumblr was a blogging platform, right? I mean, that was really what
blogging, right? And that was like a time, again, it was sort of, it emerged at a time when we were talking about short form content on the web. So Twitter, Tumblr, this idea of like short, quick hits and snippets. And it was a really amazing place on the web. Like I know people who came out on Tumblr. I know people who really were immersed in very niche sub communities on Tumblr. Anyway, so this Atlantic piece, it kind of talks about the rise and fall going all the way back to David Karpf, who founded Tumblr. He sold it for, I think, like $1 billion to Yahoo. And then it changed ownership to Verizon. And now it's owned by Automatic, the makers of WordPress.com. And
so stop. I'm gonna just dial down for those of us who are not as web centric as you are. So David Karp is amazing. An amazing. I don't know where he is. They tried to reach him for the Atlantic article, and he did not respond, which is sad. But hopefully, he's somewhere wonderful, doing something wonderful, and we'll hear about that. The sale to Yahoo was a nail biter. I mean, I know from inside that Tumblr was days away from being out of cash. And so the sale to Yahoo for $1 billion was like a real Hail Mary, wonderful outcome. Then Yahoo sold to AOL, and there was a whole bushel of stuff that went over to AOL. Then AOL sold to Verizon. So there's a whole series of consolidation, sales, changes of ownership. And when Verizon, the reason why Verizon selling it for essentially pennies on the dollar, it was $1 billion, and then it was sold for $3 million to Automatic, is, Automatic is the big dog in the blogging space. And so, first of all, for it to sell to Automatic is an odd, maybe wonderful, but certainly notable outcome. And then secondly, because they were essentially competitors, it's unclear to those of us who are fans of Tumblr whether Automatic's purchase, under Matt Mullenweg, is really to rebirth it, rebuild it, or whether to kind of scoop it into the Automatic family of brands. And I don't think we know that yet.
Well, what's so interesting is everything about I think Matt's leadership. Like I always refer to him as like a guardian of the galaxy. And I say that in like the best way possible. Is that he's always been such a champion of open source software and really democratizing publishing on the web. And so I actually love the fact that he is now at the helm of Tumblr, because I think he can sort of revitalize it in a way that other tech leaders can't and won't. He just announced like a few days ago that he's going to be working on it full time this year, which is exciting. It's different though than the rest of the Automatic portfolio, because there's nothing about Tumblr right now that's open source. That said, so the second article, which is the New Yorker, it talks about how Tumblr is sort of kind of making a comeback, and specifically because it was obsolete. So there's this thing happening right now with Gen Z where like 90s or early 2000s nostalgia is just coming back in full force. So this New Yorker article basically describes how, if you go onto Tumblr today, it's not dead. It's like alive and well, but it's almost like very indie.
So before we get to the optimistic part, I just want to say one more thing about the Atlantic article, because there was this mid-December meltdown where the then CEO, whose name I'd never heard before, sent out this fairly draconian email to Tumblr users and essentially said, no more porn, and was fairly explicit about body parts and acts that would no longer be allowed on Tumblr. Tumblr's whole history has been, at least in part, about free expression, and porn as a subset of that, or a leader in that. And he then, I don't know what happened, it's not clear, but he got fired or quit. And Matt had this somewhat odd comment in which he said to a reporter, we're not going to really publicize his leaving for his privacy and safety, which suggests that there were threats against him for taking down porn. And then buried in this story is Apple essentially saying, in their very Apple-ish way, yeah, we have terms of service that say no porn. Either take porn off Tumblr or lose your place in the App Store. Like not very emotional, not a big deal. Just like, duh, we don't do porn.
And when they acquired Tumblr, though, I don't think Matt said he would reverse that policy.
Well, we'd have to dig into what did AOL do about porn? What did Verizon do about porn? I thought it was off the site years ago, but
this is where I think there's like some nuance and stuff, just in terms of like what constitutes, not safe for work content versus porn.
I guess that, yeah. So the New Yorker article, which is the kind of more upbeat one, essentially says, to your point, everything old is new again. there's lots of great energy at Tumblr, and it's on the rise. And Matt would
Mhm.
be the man to fuel that, right? I mean, he
That's my belief. And I also think independent of Automatic and Matt's leadership, like there are just macro trends right now that make Tumblr completely ripe for a new generation of tech users to really take to it. So if you look at TikTok, for example, like the entire content discovery engine is actually very akin to Tumblr. Sort of all of these niche sub communities and conversation. It's like I see it as very analogous. Where TikTok is video, Tumblr is almost the content mirror to TikTok.
so I predict a headline for 90 days from now. So I'll take a $1 bet if you want that 90 days from now, some super right wing neo Nazi something will build a Tumblr site. It won't have porn on it, but it will have equally objectionable, you know, all fill in the blank community must die language. And Matt will be squarely in the middle of is TikTok a publisher or is it a platform? So I can write that article today and put it in
And
my.
there's a precedent for it. You have to look at all of the just what WordPress.com has done with controversial sites.
Well, tell me, what have they done?
I think, I mean, I don't think Matt has ever, I think they've been very clear with their terms of service. Like they've taken sites down. It's WordPress.org where they don't. And that's where people always conflate the two. Because
Yeah, because it has the same.
WordPress.com is owned by Automatic and WordPress.org is self-hosted. So this is actually where it gets a little bit confusing for people.
Yeah. Okay. So confusing, but not. I mean, so so what you're saying is that in the spirit of that, Tumblr, which is hosted on WordPress on automatic servers now, uh, would be well within its rights to edit objectionable content. COVID misinformation. All right, so let's put a pin in this. Tumblr is a work in progress. Matt is a wonderful. He's the lone survivor from the early days of Web 1.0 who hasn't sold his soul to the devil. And
Yeah.
presumably people have swung by and said, we'd like to buy Automatic for billions of dollars. And he said no.
They've raised a lot of money from Salesforce Ventures and Mark Benioff recently. I just looked this up. Like 3 years ago, this is a good example. There were blogs that had Sandy Hook deniers, and WordPress took it down. WordPress.com took it down. So if you look at their policy in terms of service, they're not afraid to do that. There's a precedent.
All right. Okay. Which brings us to subject number 2 of this fabulously frothy pod that we have prepared for you today. Let's just start. I don't want to jump into this without being sure that all of our various listeners from different worlds know who we're talking about. So how much do you know, Alexa, about Peter Thiel?
PayPal mafia, PayPal founder, Facebook board member, or I guess not anymore. He's stepping down, and supporter of right-wing leadership.
So that's all accurate. Well done. You get an A for the day. But it's weird and murkier than that. So, I mean, I don't want to say his politics because it's not really politics. I mean, he's been kind of a little bit all over the map. I mean, he uses this catch-all phrase libertarian, but it isn't clear that he hasn't been, at least in parts in his career, kind of a religious fanatic. At one point, he sent a rather pointed letter out to all of his people in one of his funds, essentially saying the world was coming to an end and they should essentially count their blessings because God was going to come and end the earth shortly. He at one point was building or planning to build islands in the ocean that people could move to, so they would not have to be the overseen by any government. So um, he was. It's a debate whether or not his sexuality is public or private. I mean, it's certainly public. Gawker, back in the day, Nick Denton published an article about him, and he essentially funded incredibly litigious attack on Gawker and put Gawker out of business and bankrupt the company. So he's sharp-elbowed. He's kind of mostly angry, like just angry a lot, and was a supporter of Donald Trump early on, gave him millions of dollars, and seems to be gearing up to be much more public's the wrong word, much more visible and engaged in national and local politics.
And do you see that as the impetus for stepping down from the board?
Yes. I mean, that's not only do I mean, I'm not
I guess I wonder though,
that.
why would he leave a platform though that he could leverage to his advantage?
Well, you know, when people leave platforms, you never really know what that means. I mean, presumably, so again, I'm just picking at threads here, but there is no doubt that there were battles at Facebook in which Thiel was actively in favor of not taking Donald Trump down, not limiting free speech on the platform, not making any, letting, misinformation as it's been broadly defined kind of have the freedom to publish. And I assume that he and Zuckerberg had, one presumes what, screaming, vicious, threatening, legal, headbanging battles. So if he's going to become more political than he already is, I don't, did he step down to get Facebook out of the line of fire, or did he step down because he was told you can't do both? You can't be, a public politician. And by the way, it's unclear that he's not running for something. He's a young man. He's very engaged. I mean, everyone who's on the far right is looking at what is Trump 2.0. Trump seems a little long in the tooth to be Trump 2.0. So, I mean, maybe Thiel, maybe Thiel wants to run for president.
Is that what you're scared of?
Oh, I'm scared of a lot of things. I mean, when he was asked when someone who's a close friend of his, acquaintance of his, was asked why he aligned with Donald Trump, their answer was, Peter, he just wants to see everything burnt to the ground.
Cool.
And, if you're a billionaire, a multi-billionaire, that buys you a lot of matches and a lot of lighter fluid.
Yeah. So what should our listeners take away from these headlines?
When we talk about the money behind the far right, we talk about the Koch brothers, we talk about the Mercers, and then we talk about all of the various things they fund, and you can do tributaries back to where all their money has gone, all of the various think tanks and publications and Breitbart and, et cetera. But I think until now, Thiel's money hasn't been on that list, and maybe it should be.
Okay. There's
a rumor, though it's not yet proven, that Thiel is the money behind the Sarah Palin New York Times lawsuit.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So someone to watch in the coming year or two.
Well, certainly in the midterms.
The next election. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, leading up to the midterms for sure. And so I think the question I would say to listeners is, does Thiel have a political agenda? Does he, I mean, the thing about the word libertarian is it's a little hard to decipher because, it gets lumped into small government, no taxes. One of the famous quotes from one of the leading voices in the libertarian side of the world is, I want the federal government to be so small that you can put it on the head of a pin. So, I mean, that kind of aligns with the burn it to the ground phrase,
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see.
I mean, no, he's the name to watch for sure. And anyway, enough said, except to say, if you Google him and dig in, there's a lot of national press starting to raise concerns about, whether or not he's actually the leader. And someone described him as Nazi curious.
Oh. Okay.
Which, I mean, oh, and then the other thing is, he and Elon Musk despise one another.
I mean, everyone loves a good billionaire versus billionaire fight. So.
Well, the story going back to the early days of PayPal is that they were both early PayPal founders. And Musk was the CEO of when it was rebranded X.com and then something else before it became PayPal. So Musk was CEO for like a year, and then Thiel threw him out and took the CEO job. So, I mean, there's real deep-seated early day hatred there. But yeah, spy versus spy, billionaire versus billionaire. Anyway, all right. So on to chapter 3, which is kind of more lighthearted, but not really.
I mean, there's just a lot of volatility happening right now with companies. Glossier, Zillow.
Explain to me. So Zillow took this swing at home flipping. Did I miss the chapter where Zillow went from being a great little profitable business that owned home data to deciding it wanted to turn its access to data into another, like I didn't even know that.
I mean the real estate market during the pandemic, they wanted to strike while the iron was hot. And so they used all of the data to basically leverage assets where they felt like they could strategically flip and make profit, but it didn't go so well. I actually listened to a podcast with Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, recently. And he basically said, like, he didn't comment too much, but he just said that, sometimes companies make the mistake of, addressing like tangential market opportunities without really building core capabilities around it, right? Just because you are in sort of a real estate space doesn't necessarily mean that the home flipping business is a competency.
So you're saying if I'm a restaurant produce distributor and I think, boy, this restaurant business, lifting these boxes off the truck at 6 a.m. doesn't seem like nearly as much fun as owning a restaurant. I think I'll just get into the restaurant business because I know it. Yeah, like
totally. And you might be a supplier of like chickens, but like just because you're like, oh, transporting chickens, I could transport like, pigs and cows. It's like, no, it's like different, adjacent, but different.
So
and very tempting.
Does Zillow survive? I mean, they're making all kinds of cuts, kind of draconian cuts. I'm trying to remember if the CEO left. Zillow cut 2,000 jobs or a quarter of its staff, wrote down the losses of $500 million. For fourth quarter, Zillow reported a net loss of $261 million. I mean, the thing about board members is, this is a famous truism. When you sit on the board of a company, there's only really 3 things you can do, right? You can sell the company, you can fire the CEO, or you can raise more money. Those are you got 3 buttons you can push as a board member, and fire the CEO is kind of the go-to button for a company in trouble because clean slate, get a gel-free card, new CEO. I'm just looking through the Wall Street Journal. I thought the CEO, Chief Executive Richard Barton, said the company would grow revenue. Do we know that name? Is Barton the old guy or the new guy? I don't remember.
I mean, boards are also in place to advise and protect the CEO. If the CEO manages the board well, yeah.
Yes, for sure. Board, yes, for sure. All right, so let's move on to the other hot button story of the meltdown, and let's talk about Peloton. CEO steps down, firm to cut 2,800 jobs. They claim none of those jobs are the actual class leaders. So pardon me for being dumb, but what do 2,800 people do at Peloton if they don't sit on the bike and lead the class? Like,
there's like supply chain, operations, marketing. It's a lot. They grew really, really fast. They also launched like a treadmill, their treadmill product. There's also content strategy. Like there's obviously the instructors who are like the talent, but there's an entire content ecosystem behind Peloton, which some would say is actually the most valuable asset that they have, not necessarily the hardware.
So the new CEO of Peloton was the former CFO of Netflix, and then before
Spotify.
Netflix, right?
So it was Spotify it was Netflix first, and then Spotify more recently.
Right. So all of the tea leaf readers say he's come in to clean things up for a sale.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're a buyer, the first thing you don't want to do when you own the new company is fire 2,800 people. So
I mean, I think what is happening right now is just it's a correction that is a response to the pandemic injecting a ton of capital into companies that were overvalued to begin with. So just because Peloton was sort of the it brand of the pandemic and people wanted to work out at home because they couldn't get into a gym, or they had extra time in their day because they were not commuting anymore to their office. I mean, the stock skyrocketed, but is the market really there? So I don't know. I just see all of this as just par for the course.
GameStop rocketed too, and I don't think there's any business there. And AMC unclear how much.
Everything is volatile right now. Again, I mentioned Glossier, which was like another darling in the D2C beauty space, and they laid off I think like 80 engineers, mostly technical staff.
I don't know who Glossier is.
It's like a beauty brand.
Did not know this.
Yeah.
So let's play the game. If Peloton is for sale, who's the buyer?
Well, it's rumors are like Amazon.
Yeah. You know, it's unclear to me what the internal feeling at Amazon is now that Bezos is off in rocket ship land. I mean, does it still have that driving, hungry? You know, they've been in a million businesses, right? They're in the pharmacy business. They're in the grab and go deli business. They've still, you know, they've got their grocery business. You know, if I were coming in to run Amazon, I would take a hard look at, you know, all the lines of business they're in and say which are most profitable, which have the most upside, which ones do we want to be out of? Because, you know, grocery is really hard. And my understanding is they've never made a dime in grocery.
Yeah. I mean, as a consumer, I would say, like, given a choice between selling Peloton going to Apple or or Amazon, I mean, I would love to see Peloton go to Apple. I don't have a Peloton, but I would definitely not buy a Peloton if it was owned by Amazon, and I would definitely buy a Peloton if it was owned by Apple.
So I have been on a Peloton. I can tell you it's currently all powered by Android. And when you try and connect your Apple AirPods or Apple phone to it, there's definitely a little bit of a culture clash there.
Yeah. But I trust Apple more with my health data than I do Amazon.
Here's the interesting question. I mean, let's pretend we're in the meeting at Apple where we're considering Peloton. So I'll be the proponent. Our future is in the subscription business. It's not in the advertising business. These guys have a good footprint. The products, it's Apple quality in terms of its build. It's not a crappy bike. The only thing I'd be worried about is the cost for the monthly subscription is high. It's $59.
But I think then they can easily bundle it with Apple TV. So like, for example, like I'm not a subscriber to Apple TV. I'm on the cusp because I've heard such good things about Ted Lasso and the morning show, right? It's like, it's the kind of thing where it's like, oh, there are a lot of people who already are subscribers or not subscribers. This either converts the non-users or it retains the existing ones.
So, all right. So again, the internals of Apple are invisible to the outside world, but somebody who runs a business for Apple needs to raise their hand and say, yes, I run Apple TV and I'll take Peloton, or I'll take I'll take the direct report of the CEO up to me. Like
it'll be the Apple Health division. It's the team that is making sure that you can do like EKGs and monitor your heart rate on your wrist. They're the team that should take the bike.
And yet, just to play devil's advocate, all the other things you just listed all go through the watch.
Mm-hmm.
And the watch is core to Apple. They spent years building it. They refine it every 6 months or a year. It's a tiny little, it's very Apple-ish in its supply chain needs, in-house, I mean, can you close your eyes and imagine walking into an Apple store and there being a Peloton bike? Like here's the challenge. In order for Apple to do it the way they generally do things, they would have to acquire it, run it as a standalone business, spend 2 years essentially stripping it down to every piece's parts, rework the supply chain, rework the product, relaunch it, and risk angering all the owners of the legacy bike. Has Apple ever done that? Have they ever? I mean, they're not really an acquisition company.
No, but I mean, there's a precedent where they acquired Beats and yet they still moved forward with the AirPods line.
That's exactly. Well, this is why you're good at this podcast, because I did not put those pieces together, but I never understood Beats, except they gave me a pair when I bought a laptop years ago, which one of my sons really liked having.
I think it's in some ways the Beats just gave them like a stake in the ground. We want to own hardware in the audio space, but they wanted to build like first party capabilities with their own product. I could see them doing a ton of due diligence right now around the supply chain. Maybe there's a wait and see moment here with the new CEO, but they can operate on a 2 to 5 year timeline where they don't need to strike and say, oh, let's get Peloton for cheap, right? But I think there's definitely a path where they can make the acquisition in the next year or two, and then they could simultaneously lay all of the infrastructure behind the scenes to make it more of a native Apple product.
All right. Well, we are out of time. I have one final.
What do I know, though?
No. I think it's you. The analysis was valuable. I have one final pitch for our listeners. Alexa is going on maternity leave at some point in the indeterminate but not that far away future, and so we are out
next 4 weeks.
So we have a couple of potential co-hosts that we're discussing. If you're a regular listener of this podcast and you think that you could fit Alexa's rather formidable shoes for a period of time,
or make it your own, not fill my shoes. Don't replace me. Make it your own.
Well, shoes. As I was using the shoe analogy, I was like, is that sexist? Would I say that about a man? I think I would. Do I have big shoes? Anyway, so if you're interested in joining either as a guest or potentially as a co-host, please send us a tweet. I'm Steve at magnifymedia.com is the easiest way to reach me, probably email, or Alexa, who's on Twitter, but doesn't really read Twitter, do you?
I actually read Twitter. I just don't post anymore.
All right. All right, everybody. With that, we are out of time. Hope you enjoyed the show. Everyone stay warm and go. Who do you want to win the Super Bowl, Alexa? Go.
I'm going to
Jets?
say, no, I think I'm going to root for the Bengals, Cincinnati.
I said Jets, knowing the Jets are not in the Super Bowl, by the way. See you next week.
All right. See you next week.
Bye.